The wind screamed across the frozen plains of Zelvora 7, a planet where life did not belong. Ice stretched to the horizon in every direction, and deadly storms could rise without warning, swallowing even the strongest shelters in minutes. Jack Miles, a human engineer stationed at Outpost 14, was out in the cold, struggling to fix a broken communications relay that had been damaged during the last blizzard. His face was covered with frost, his gloved hands numb, and his breath came out in thick clouds as he fought the bitter wind. Zelvora 7 wasn't a place for heroes or adventure. It was a mining world, cold and forgotten, where a few humans maintained old machines and watched over automated systems. Jack had been here for months, surviving on routine, solitude, and ration packs. He didn't expect much from life anymore. But that changed the moment he saw movement in the snow. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Something dark was lying near a jagged ridge, barely visible beneath a thin sheet of ice. He squinted, wiped his goggles, and stepped closer, careful not to fall into a hidden crevice. What he found made his heart skip a beat. It was a woman, or at least someone who looked like one. Her skin had a soft blue glow, and her clothes were torn, clearly not made for this environment. She was breathing, but just barely. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, then closed again. Jack didn't know what species she was, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was freezing to death. Without thinking twice, he knelt beside her, checked her pulse, and began wrapping her in his thermal cloak. She was too light for someone her size, and he could feel how cold her body had become. He lifted her carefully and started walking back toward the outpost, each step a battle against the wind and the weight of the storm pressing against him. The blizzard grew stronger as he moved, snow hitting his face like tiny needles, but he pushed on. He didn't know who she was or why she was out here, but something deep inside told him he had to help her. It wasn't just about saving a life, it felt like fate had placed her in his path for a reason. By the time he reached the outpost, the wind had almost knocked him down several times, but he finally made it inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the storm outside. Jack laid the alien woman on the cot, quickly activated the heating units, and wrapped her in thermal blankets. Her skin was pale and covered with frost, and her breathing was shallow. He opened an emergency pack, prepared a warm hydration mix, and gently pressed it to her lips. At first, there was no response. But then, slowly, she swallowed. Jack sighed in relief. He didn't know if she would make it, but at least she had a chance now. He sat beside her, checking her vital signs on a small scanner. The readings were strange, nothing like human biology, but they told him she was still alive, barely. Hours passed as the storm continued to rage outside. Jack stayed by her side, wiping the frost from her skin, making sure the heater kept the room warm, and watching her face for any sign of change. Finally, just as he was about to doze off in his chair, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing a soft violet color that seemed to glow in the dim light. She looked at him confused and weak and tried to speak, but her voice was too faint. Jack leaned forward, speaking gently, telling her she was safe, that he had found her in the snow, and that she needed to rest. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand whether he was real or just a dream, and then closed her eyes again, her breathing a little stronger now. Jack sat back, still watching her, wondering who she was and how she ended up here. Zelvora 7 was not a place for visitors, especially not ones from alien worlds. Had her ship crashed? Was she alone? And what would happen if her people came looking for her? Questions filled his mind, but there were no answers yet. All he knew was that he had done the right thing. He had saved someone, a stranger in need, and somehow that felt more important than anything else he had done in a long time. The storm outside kept roaring, shaking the walls of the outpost, but inside, a fragile life was holding on, and with it, a new story had begun, one that neither of them could have ever expected. The howling storm outside had started to weaken. Her breathing had become more stable, her skin slowly regaining color, and her body no longer felt like ice, but she still hadn't spoken a single word. Jack had tried asking simple questions: where she was from, what her name was, how she ended up on Zelvora 7, but each time, she only blinked in confusion or looked away with tired eyes, as if the words didn't make sense. It wasn't clear if she couldn't speak his language or if she was still too weak to try, but something about her gaze made Jack believe she understood more than she showed. He had seen fear before, but her eyes held something deeper, like a mixture of sorrow, caution, and something she was trying to hide. Jack wasn't a scientist or a doctor, just an engineer with a good heart and a habit of trusting people until they gave him a reason not to. Still, there was no ignoring the fact that this woman, whoever she was, didn't belong here, and her presence was raising more questions than answers. She hadn't arrived by accident. Zalvora 7 was too remote, too dangerous for someone to just wander onto it. So how did she get here? Jack couldn't shake the feeling that her appearance was just the beginning of something bigger. For now, he focused on keeping her alive. He brought her food in small portions, mixed liquids with nutrients, and spoke gently to her every few hours, hoping to make her feel safe. On the third day, as the last of the storm cleared and sunlight bounced off the ice outside, something changed. Jack walked into the room with a heat pack in his hand when he noticed she was no longer lying on the cot. His heart jumped. Had she wandered out into the cold? But before panic could take over, he saw her sitting quietly near the heating unit, her body wrapped in one of his old jackets, her violet eyes studying a datapad he had left on the table. She looked calm, more alert, and when he stepped closer, she didn't flinch or back away. He crouched down, offering her the pack, and to his surprise, she reached out and took it, her fingers still shaking but stronger than before. "You're feeling better," Jack said with a soft smile, and for the first time, she nodded. It wasn't much, but it was progress. He sat beside her, trying again. "Do you have a name?" he asked slowly. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then slowly shook her head. Whether she didn't want to tell him or truly didn't remember, Jack couldn't tell. But her silence wasn't empty. It was careful, like someone who had seen too much to trust easily. Over the next few days, they developed a quiet rhythm. Jack gave her space but stayed nearby. He showed her how to use the datapads, how to open ration packs, how to adjust the temperature, and little by little, she started doing things on her own. She even followed him to the control room once, watching with curiosity as he repaired a broken circuit panel. She pointed at the tools, mimicked his movements, and Jack noticed that her hands were fast and precise, almost too precise. It became clear that she was no ordinary traveler. Her mind was sharp, her senses alert, and her movements, even when weak, carried grace. He had seen trained scouts and soldiers before, and she reminded him of them. But who trained her, and why was she out here alone? One night, as the cold outside crept back and the wind began to rise again, Jack sat near the heater, sipping synthetic coffee when she approached and sat across from him without a word. She stared at the flame-like glow inside the heater and then slowly looked at him. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Jack blinked in surprise. "Why what?" he replied. She paused, then spoke again. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was strange, almost musical, but her words were clear. Jack leaned back, thinking. "Because you needed help," he said honestly. "And because I couldn't leave you to die out there." She stared at him for a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod, her eyes thoughtful. That short conversation told Jack more than he expected. She understood him. She could speak his language. She had been choosing silence. But now, something had changed. Maybe it was trust. Maybe it was the slow return of strength. Or maybe it was the beginning of something she could no longer keep hidden. Jack asked again, gently, "What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I'll remember." The way she said it wasn't confusion, it was pain. Jack didn't push her. He just nodded and said, "Then we'll figure it out together." After that night, she started speaking more, asking simple questions about the outpost, about the machines, about Earth. She seemed fascinated by the idea of oceans and forests, of cities and people who weren't surrounded by ice. Jack showed her pictures on his datapad, and her eyes lit up like a child seeing the stars for the first time. But every time he tried to ask about her past, about how she ended up here, her expression would darken and the silence would return. There was something she didn't want to face or couldn't. Still, Jack wasn't in a hurry. Whatever she had been through, It had scarred her deeply. He could see it in the way she flinched at sudden noises, how she always kept one eye on the door, and how she still slept with a tool in her hand, like a weapon. She had been hunted, maybe hurt, maybe betrayed. He didn't know the details, but he didn't need to. He only needed to show her that she was safe now. As another week passed, they became something like a team. She helped him with repairs, silently observing and then assisting without being asked. She moved like someone trained in survival, and sometimes Jack caught her scanning the skies with a strange look, as if expecting someone or something to find her. Then, one morning, as Jack was checking the satellite feeds, a strange signal flashed across the screen. It was brief, distorted, and gone in seconds, but it didn't match any known source. His heart tightened. When he turned to her, she was already standing behind him, her eyes fixed on the screen, her body tense. "They found me," she whispered, and Jack's blood ran cold. The moment the strange signal appeared and vanished from the satellite screen, the quiet safety of the outpost shattered like thin ice beneath heavy boots, and though the alien woman didn't explain much, the fear in her voice was enough for Jack to understand the danger was real and close. He didn't ask questions. He had spent enough time around her to know when not to press, and something about the way she stared at the frozen horizon told him that if they stayed, whoever had sent that signal would find them soon. The outpost, once a refugee, had now become a trap, and as much as Jack hated the idea of leaving behind all his work, he knew they had to move fast and far. He quickly began preparing for the journey, gathering supplies, fuel cells, portable heat packs, and anything they could carry in the snow rover parked inside the hangar. She helped him without hesitation, her movements precise, her eyes scanning the perimeter every few seconds, as if she expected an attack at any moment. Jack wanted to ask who they were, the ones who had found her, but he held his tongue, because deep down he already suspected that she was running from something far more dangerous than a storm. Before leaving, Jack transmitted a fake maintenance report to the planetary monitoring station, hoping to throw off any tracking systems, and then, just before sunrise, they drove out into the endless white. The snow rover rumbled across the frozen ground, cutting through layers of ice and snow as the two unlikely companions sat side by side in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The alien woman, still without a name, kept her gaze on the sky, watching for signs of movement above the clouds, while Jack focused on navigation, steering them toward a hidden research post deep in the Glacier Mountains, a place he had visited once during an emergency drill, a place now long abandoned but still marked on his private maps. It was their best chance of survival. The frozen world around them was beautiful and deadly at the same time. The endless plains of silver ice reflected the pale light of Zalvora's twin moons, and the biting wind roared like an ancient beast as it swept over the hills. They passed jagged cliffs and frozen lakes, saw strange glowing shapes beneath the ice-old energy lines from a mining station long buried, and heard distant rumbles that could have been ice quakes or something else entirely. For hours, they drove in silence until she finally spoke. "They are not human," she said quietly. "They are hunters from my world. They don't forgive. They don't stop." Jack glanced at her, waiting. She didn't look at him, but continued. "I escaped a long time ago. I thought I was free, but they always search. They found me again." Jack didn't know what to say. He had expected something dangerous, but the way she spoke cold and heavy with memory made him realize how deep her pain went. "Then we stay ahead of them," he said finally, gripping the wheel tighter. She nodded, but her face remained hard, like someone who had seen too much death to believe in hope easily. As they drove deeper into the frozen world, the terrain grew rougher. Ice cliffs rose like walls, and strange storms began to form on the horizon, spinning in slow circles of snow and static. They had to stop more often, clear the snow from the intake vents, and rest in shifts to avoid exhaustion. Jack found her standing watch every time he woke up, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark, her ears tuned to every sound outside. One night, just as Jack had fallen asleep in the back of the rover, a low growl echoed through the valley. The woman was already on her feet, weapon in hand, a small energy blade she had built from spare parts, and when Jack jumped up, she raised a finger to her lips and motioned toward the window. Outside, a shape moved across the ice, tall, thin, with limbs too long for a human and a head that shimmered like glass. It stopped near the rover, sniffed the air, then turned and disappeared into the blizzard. Neither of them spoke until morning. "That was one of them," she whispered. "A scout." Jack realized then that the hunters she spoke of weren't just people chasing her, they were something worse, something that stalked across worlds and didn't care who they killed. He drove faster after that, pushing the rover through harsh terrain, guided by the old map in his head and a growing sense of urgency. Every few hours, they stopped only to rest and refuel. On the fifth day, the ice beneath their rover cracked, sending them sliding into a frozen ravine. The crash wasn't deadly, but it wrecked one of the wheels and damaged their power system. They had no choice but to continue on foot, carrying what they could, wrapped in thermal gear, facing winds that sliced through skin like knives. The journey became slower, more painful, and every night they found themselves a little colder, a little more desperate. But something strange began to happen as well. Jack noticed her speaking more, not just in warnings or short answers, but in stories, small glimpses of her past. She told him about her homeworld, a place of violet forests and silver skies, where technology grew like vines and children learned to shape metal with their minds. She told him how she was born into a noble line, chosen to be a protector, trained in battle and stealth. But she had questioned the laws, questioned the cruelty, and for that, she had been hunted. "I was never meant to survive," she said once as they sat near a thermal rock. "I was supposed to die alone, punished for disobedience." Jack looked at her, feeling something heavy rise in his chest. "But you didn't," he said. "You made it." She looked at him then, her eyes soft for the first time. "Because of you," she said. He didn't reply, but the silence between them felt different now, less cold, more connected. On the seventh day, they saw it, the dark outline of the abandoned research post nestled between two jagged peaks. Smoke rose from one of the broken towers, a sign of life or a warning, they couldn't tell. Jack raised his scanner and checked the readings. Energy signatures. Faint, but present. Someone or something was already there. The woman stepped beside him, her voice calm. "We go together," she said. Jack nodded, heart pounding. Whatever waited inside, they had come too far to turn back now. As Jack and the alien woman stepped into the shadow of the broken research post, the icy wind seemed to vanish, replaced by a deep and unnatural stillness that surrounded the wreckage like a warning. The metal walls were cracked and blackened by old burns, the antenna towers snapped and hanging like broken arms, and half-buried footprints, some human, some not, trailed into the darkness beyond the shattered gate. Jack gripped his pulse rifle tightly, his eyes scanning every shadow, while the woman moved silently beside him, her blade hidden beneath her cloak, her senses stretched far beyond what he could understand. The cold no longer mattered. Every instinct inside him screamed that they were not alone, and even though the place was abandoned, there was a heaviness in the air that pressed down on their skin, like the frozen ruins themselves were holding their breath. They entered through a torn sidewall, stepping into a long corridor where flickering lights revealed overturned equipment, scorched control panels, and a trail of dried blood smeared across the floor. Jack's stomach twisted at the sight, but he kept moving, leading them toward the command center, where he hoped to find working systems, or at least a map of the deeper tunnels. The woman said nothing, her expression unreadable, though her steps were slow, as if each corner of the station reminded her of something painful. As they reached the main hall, a sudden noise echoed through the walls, a clang of metal, distant but sharp, and both of them froze. Jack raised his rifle, the woman dropped into a defensive stance, and they waited, every second stretching like a blade drawn across glass. When nothing followed, they moved again, slower now, every movement careful. In the command room, Jack managed to power up the backup terminal using an emergency fuel cell, and faded screens blinked to life, revealing fragmented logs, status errors, and one curious entry, an encrypted message left only 2 days ago. He tapped it open, and a distorted voice crackled through the speakers, speaking in a strange dialect that the woman immediately recognized. Her face went pale. "They were here," she said. "They questioned the survivors. Then they ended them." Jack read the rest of the log and found names of the crew, all marked as missing. All except one Subject 9 escaped through lower tunnels. That name meant nothing to Jack, but the woman suddenly looked to the wall map and pointed. If there's someone alive, they'll be hiding below. We need to find them. They may know what the hunters want. Jack nodded, but just as they prepared to leave, a soft hum filled the room, and the floor vibrated under their feet. Motion sensors. Someone had triggered them. Or something. They hurried down the corridor, past broken labs and frozen bodies, into the lower levels, where the walls grew narrow and the lights dimmer. The wreckage here was more severe, as if an explosion had torn through the structure. Pipes hissed steam, and the floor was coated in thin frost that cracked under their boots. Suddenly, they heard breathing fast, shallow, terrified. Jack aimed his light toward a small maintenance hatch, and there, curled inside like a frightened animal, was a thin man in torn clothes, his eyes wild and skin covered in frostbite. "Don't kill me," he cried. "I told them everything. I didn't have a choice." Jack lowered his weapon slowly and stepped closer. "We're not with them. Tell us what happened." The man, trembling, explained in broken sentences. They came from the sky silver armor, no faces. They wanted her, the one like her. He pointed at the woman with a shaking hand. They knew she was here. They tore through the team, one by one. I ran. I hid here. They said she holds the code, the weapon. They called her a key. Jack looked at the woman, who stood still, her face like stone. "Is it true?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "My blood carries something they want. My ancestors were protectors of ancient technology locked into our genes. I refuse to let them use it. That's why they hunt me. They believe I can activate their lost weapons." The truth hit Jack like a thunderclap. She wasn't just a fugitive, she was the last link to a forgotten power that could destroy planets. "And if they catch you," he asked, "they'll use me to awaken war machines buried for centuries. They'll burn worlds with them." The weight of her words settled like ice in his chest. Just then, alarms blared through the base, loud and angry. The hunters were coming. The survivor screamed, clutching his head, and the woman silenced him with a quick touch to his shoulder, sending him into unconscious sleep, using a trick Jack didn't even question anymore. "We have to destroy this place," she said. "They must not find what's here." Jack hesitated. "If we blow the core, we'll never escape." She looked at him, calm but fierce. "Then we choose. Run and let them win. Or fight and stop them here." Jack stared at the ruined walls, at the trembling ceiling, at the dying light. He thought of Earth, of all the colonies out there, all the people who had no idea that death was flying toward them hidden behind alien eyes. He looked at her and saw not a weapon, but someone who had lost everything, who had been running alone for so long that she didn't expect anyone to stand beside her. And he made his choice. "We fight," he said. Together they moved quickly, planting explosive charges along the power core, linking them to a timer. Outside, the sky darkened, and the sound of engines roared through the clouds. The hunters had arrived. Jack grabbed the last of the weapons from the armory, a prototype pulse cannon with only one shot, and gave the woman his sidearm. "When this place blows, we head north. There's an old transport route buried under the ice. If we move fast, we can vanish." She nodded, eyes locked on his, and for the first time, Jack saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger, but trust. Real trust. As the countdown began and the base shook with the approach of enemies, the two of them took their positions by the wrecked entry gate, ready to face whatever came through. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and almost out of time, but they had made a decision. No more running. No more hiding. The storm was coming, but so were they, and whatever happened next would change everything. As the final seconds of the countdown ticked away, the base trembled under the weight of something huge landing outside, casting long shadows through the cracked walls and shattered gates where Jack and the alien woman waited, side by side, their breath fogging in the cold air, weapons ready, hearts pounding. The hunters were close, too close, and Jack could feel their presence like a sickness in the air, silent and deadly, wearing armor that gleamed silver under the broken sky, eyes hidden behind black masks that showed no mercy. When the first of them stepped into the wreckage, the woman fired without hesitation, and Jack followed, the sound of gunfire echoing like thunder through the dead halls of the ruined base. The battle was fierce and fast, a blur of movement, light, and pain, and for a moment, it felt like they wouldn't survive, but the woman fought with a grace and rage Jack had never seen before, and together they held the gate until the core's timer reached 0. The explosion came like the roar of a dying star, fire and light bursting through the ground, swallowing the wreckage and the hunters in one massive wave, shaking the ice fields for miles around. Jack and the woman had just enough time to leap into a deep shaft below the maintenance tunnel, shielded by heavy steel, as the world above them burned. The heat passed over them, then vanished, leaving only silence and the crackle of melting frost. They emerged hours later into a wasteland of smoke and fire, the sky still glowing red where the station once stood, and though the wind still howled, the storm was dying and the hunters were gone. Jack's body ached, his hands were numb, but he was alive, and she was beside him, injured but standing. They said nothing, just nodded to each other, and began walking north, across the ice fields, toward the old transport route buried under layers of snow. The journey took 2 days, with little food and even less rest, but they never stopped, not even when the cold tried to pull them down again. They found the abandoned transport hub beneath a glacier, its power long gone, but the emergency beacons still intact. Jack repaired it using scraps from his gear, while the woman stood watch, her senses always scanning the sky. They waited another day before a signal came, a coded reply in human military frequency. A patrol ship had heard them. Rescue was possible. But there was danger too. If humans found out who she really was, what her blood could unlock, they might imprison her. Jack knew this, and he knew the woman would never trust anyone again unless he gave her a reason to. So before the ship arrived, he made a choice. He recorded a message for the crew, claiming she was a survivor of a crashed alien ship with no known technology, and that he alone had found her frozen in the storm. No mention of ancient keys, or lost weapons, or wars written in blood. Just a rescue. A second chance. The patrol ship arrived just before nightfall, engines roaring as it broke through the clouds, lights spilling across the ice like the dawn of a new world. Jack and the woman stood close together as the hatch opened and soldiers stepped out, guns lowered, eyes wide with confusion at the sight of the human and the strange, silent alien standing beside him. No one asked questions, at least not yet, and they were escorted inside, given warmth, food, and rest. As the ship climbed back into the stars, Jack looked out the window at the burning ice behind them, the world of death and war shrinking into a speck, and beside him, the woman sat quietly, staring forward, her hands folded tightly, her mind clearly still haunted. Later, in the medical bay, she spoke for the first time since the wreckage. "You could have left me. Let them take me. Why didn't you?" Jack smiled faintly, tired but honest. "Because you didn't deserve to die alone. And because I believe you can still choose who you want to be." She didn't reply, but something in her face softened, and Jack knew a wall had cracked, just a little. Over the next few days, they stayed close, avoiding attention, quietly discussing what to do next. Earth was too dangerous. So was any core system. But there were fringe worlds, new colonies, unexplored sectors, places where a human and an alien with no past could disappear and start over. Jack suggested 1 T-Rax's 4, a terraforming site with few rules and fewer questions. She agreed. By the time they landed on the human space station orbiting Mars, they'd already made their plan. They left the ship quietly, signed false names on the refugee manifest, and booked transport on a civilian freighter bound for the edge of charted space. No one stopped them. No one recognized them. They were just 2 survivors from a dead world, forgotten by the war that never officially existed. And as their ship left the solar system, Jack sat beside her in the viewing chamber, watching the stars drift past like falling snow, and for the first time since Zalvora 7, he saw her smile, not a sad or haunted one, but real. Soft. Hopeful. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and took his hand in hers, and for a long time they just sat there in silence, two souls shaped by pain, fear, and fire, now moving towards something unknown, not safety, maybe, but freedom. A new beginning. Among the stars. And though the past would always be part of them, it no longer controlled them. They had survived the storm. They had survived the war. And now, whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as fugitives, not as weapons, but as something stronger, something rare, something human.